Things movies always get wrong about Batman. Since his debut on the silver screen in 1943, has been featured in more than a dozen theatrical films. He's one of the most, and yet, no matter how good the movies are, they always seem to mess something up. Whether it's his method, the biggest sticking point for Batman fans when it comes to his portrayal in film is that in the comics, there's one die-hard, steadfast rule that he abides by when it comes to dealing with his villains Batman. There are a few exceptions in the movies. Bruce Wayne might actually be the most prolific murderer that Gotham City has ever seen, and that's saying something. Tim Burton's The weirdest thing about this one, though? Batman's, even if you're willing to relax the rules about Batman killing people, the movies still tend to take things a step too far. Throwing a guy off, the reasons here are pretty obvious, especially since the movies insist on showing us Batman's origin story over and over and over again. Since his parent, occasionally, movie Batman will just straight up pack heat, like in Batman v Superman, where he stands around with a useless rifle while Superman and Wonder Woman trade punches with Doomsday. Mostly, until they were the source of sprawling, 20 film franchises that were the most popular things in Hollywood, superheroes were generally considered to be a subgenre of action movies, subject to all the tropes and traditions that you'd expect. That's where the relationship between an action movie hero and their villain, for instance, is usually operating on some kind of personal connection. Take classics like, in the language of action movies, that ties up everything with a nice, neat bow, but for a superhero, it doesn't really work. Batman doesn't need. Ask anyone who loves Batman about the Dark Knight's hometown, and you'll almost certainly hear that Gotham City is almost as important as the character himself. It has to be a setting. Maybe it was an effort to seem more realistic, or maybe just save a little money by using stock footage of Chicago rather than designing a whole new environment, but either way, both the Dark Knight trilogy and the more recent DC films have shown Gotham to be a pretty normal town. Even the 19s, what really makes it frustrating is that the Tim Burton films actually went all out with giving Gotham its own character. Under Burton and along with plenty of other nicknames, Batman is often called the world's greatest detective. He first appeared, the closest he's ever come is in Batman '89, when he actually figures out the Joker's plot to dose TV personalities with Smilex, and determines that it's a compound poison that can be activated by the use of two different, seemingly random cosmetics. That's pretty much it. It's a great movie, but The Dark Knight might just be the low point in terms of actual detective work. When he's caught up in, Robin's introduction in 1940 was arguably the last ingredient that made the kind of character that would endure at least into the next century. As Glenn Weldon, so why is Robin always a grown-ass man whenever he shows up in the movies? Of the few movies, weirdly enough, the only version that seems to come close to the idea that Robin was a younger character is Batman v Superman, and unless you count an empty suit and a probable corpse, he's not even in that one. The old saw about Batman is that it's the billionaire businessman who's the disguise, while Batman, despite the costume, is the real person. It's an interesting one. If nothing else, it's a great way to keep a secret identity. Unless, the Bruce Wayne of the Dark Knight trilogy makes a stab at crafting the public persona that would throw people off by frolicking in water features and carefully staging car accidents, so at least there's that. Even so, the tradition of the superheroic secret identity goes all the way back to 1903 and Baroness Orczy's Scarlet Pimpernel, and it's been at the core of the Batman mythos from day one. In his first appearance for movie Batman, though, the secret identity is kind of like the secret menu at an In-N-Out Burger. It might not be to be entirely fair, though, the casual regard for the secret identity does actually lead to one of the most enjoyable moments in the entirety of the franchise. In Batman Returns, one of the biggest differences between Batman's appearances in comics and in movies comes down to sheer numbers. Batman has been in one of the big results of that is that Batman isn't exactly the prolific crime fighter in film that he is in comics. In Batman '89, sometimes, though, the attempt at fixing this one is actually worse. In Suicide Squad, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice marked the first time those two characters had appeared together in a film, but it wasn't exactly a triumph of heroics. Instead, interpersonal conflict is fine and can add some much-needed drama to a story, but by the time you get to poison gas and attempted murder, things are a little bit out of hand. Admittedly, seriously, are we really supposed to believe Batman wouldn't think a bulletproof flying man with laser eyes who also wants to fight crime would actually be a good thing to have on his side? Copyright 2019/looper.com/all rights reserved.
Raindrop, drop top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.